Hey guys and girls, my name's Dan. Welcome back to the Forge. In this episode of Trust Me, I'm a blacksmith. I'm going to show you how to redress or reface a hammer. In this video, I'm going to be removing this hammer from this handle. I've got some new handles, not a new handle to go on this hammer. It's split down the inside there, something that happens. But it also needs a little bit of refacing. And I'm going to explain why I'm taking this one off the handle to do the reface. But you don't have to take it off the handle to do the reface, but you have to be careful of something. I'm going to go over that. Now, what are we trying to achieve by facing a hammer or refacing a hammer? Well, facing the hammers, we're going to basically be taking a series of different grits of abrasive materials, so that might be a file or sandpaper, it could be angle grinding discs like what I'm going to use, or it could be a belt grinder. It could even be a rotating stone wheel or something. And whatever it is that you're using, the job that we're trying to achieve is a certain finish. We're trying to look for a shine is okay, a shiny mirror-like face is okay, but we are trying to basically achieve a good clean finish that isn't going to leave the grinding marks that are in the hammer in the work that we're working on. You can find that a lot in the new hammers that you buy from, say, if you go to like B&Q or perhaps Walmart or wherever you go to buy tools from, you'll sometimes find that the hammer faces have these sometimes concentric rings in, or they have like grinding marks in, and that can transfer into your metalwork. We don't want that, and at the same time we want either flat face, or we want the tool's face to be a nice consistent size and shape. Now that's what we're looking for when we're grinding a new hammer, which I will go over. But this particular hammer here, this hammer has chipped. So this one here has marled, and I've got some little bit of mushrooming around the outside of the hammer face, which I'm going to fix. But this one here has chipped. Now this is very hard, and this is sort of hard but a little bit soft. Not in a bad way soft. You'll find these chips happen when you come into contact with your your anvil face. They'll happen when you start hitting your slightly harder tooling, like your H13s and so on and so forth. And these are just things that happen over time. This is day-to-day use, daily wear. Someone like myself, this hammer's now been in service for about 2.5 years. I've never reground the faces on this. I've never really needed to regrind the faces on it, and I looked at it the other day and Luke pointed out there's some pretty nasty bits going on here. So what I'll do is I'll get a close-up of this to show you some of the lumps and bumps and marls and all sorts of things that have happened to it, and then we'll dress it and I'll show you it after I've finished. But I am going to remove the handle from this one because it's coming apart a little bit on me. It's not good. And then also I'll show you how to do the pre-grind on a hammer that you've just made, and that's the first thing I think I'm going to start with after I've got that handle out of there. Okay, so the best way to get a hammer handle out of a hammer is to first cut the handle off as close to the eye as possible. Like so. Right, I'm just going to take this over to the core, to the drill, and I'm going to start drilling some holes in here to see if I can break some of this material out. Okay, so this is the side that I cut off, and I've just run a drill through there, and after I've piloted it through a couple of times, a slightly larger drill bit, and run that through, and then wiggled it around a bit and broke it off. Hopefully now this will come loose. Right, just got myself a little bit of round bar here. There we are, there she comes. Right then, lovely job. Right, I'm just going to take my wooden hammer I drift, and there we are, we're out. Simple as that, really easy. Alright, it's nice and tidy now. And now I'm going to move on to start prepping these faces. Before I jump ahead too fast, let's just have a look at some of the types of damage that you can see, that you might see. So this here is a little marl that I put in the other day, and that was from using a H13 drift. And I believe, or you can see these, a little bit of mushrooming there that needs to come out. A little bit of mushrooming there needs to come out. There's also a little bit there that needs to come out. Actually, it's quite bad condition. There's a little bit of mushroom in there that I need to sort. Okay, and there's some marks on the face that need to come up. Now these don't need to be a mirror finish. You see a little bit of mushrooming here, and it's started to dome up a little bit here, which isn't ideal. But we will get this hammer back to its former glory in no time. I'm just going to show you this older hammer, and you can see quite a nasty chip there. That's, there isn't very much mushrooming on this one on this side, but on this face, again, another chip, quite a nasty chip there, and also, oops, bang the camera there, a little bit of mushrooming on this side, and also you can see there's quite a radius in there, which isn't good. You don't want that. But this hammer face, if you look at it, is ever so slightly crowned. Now this, you can see it's slightly crowned, and this is what you really are looking for in a hammer face. And believe it or not, a crowned hammer will give you straighter and flatter work than a flat hammer will. Now, I'm not quite 100% sure the science behind that, but and it's tiny, it's absolutely tiny. So the height here is slightly higher than it is in the center. Yeah, so it's lower here than it is in the center. Anyway, I'm going to now talk to you about a little bit about the discs I'm going to be using. Now, like I said, you can do this with a file. You can do this with sandpaper. You can do it with a stone. It's pretty easy, really. You can do this with lots of things. But I'm going to go over a couple of items here. These are all Dronco products, not sponsored, obviously. They're pretty much the best grinding pads and discs you can get. Abrax is quite good as well. I just find that Dronco stuff is just, you know, the Germans are ruthlessly efficient and all. So for this I will also be using some basic angle grinding stones, but I'm going to be using these flap discs. Now these are not the flat ones, these are the slightly radiused ones. This end here is higher than this end. Now you can buy these so that they're flat. I've got a 120 grit one of these as well that I'm going to be using. They work really well. So these are 40 grit. And these are 80 grit, and these are for a 4.5 inch grinder, 115 millimeter grinder. Make sure that they're in date, check them. Also on here there is a picture of someone wearing ear protection, there's a guy wearing a mask, eye protection, gloves. Make sure you know what you're doing, all this stuff. Be safe. If you're going to be using these, you should really be using a respirator. If you're going to be using these, you should be wearing all the correct PPE. So make sure that you do that. Protect yourselves. You've only got one set of eyes. You've only got one set of hands. Just look after yourself, basically. I'm pretty bad at it, so don't do as I say, not as I do. And also, we have this lovely set. I've been using these for a little while now. These are the polishing sets. They're pretty good. They contain a series of Scotch-Brite pads. In there, you've got a coarse and then a fine. And then this little, this white one here, and these two polishes, and they give a really good finish, really good quality for money. If you're making knives and stuff or axes, these also work great for that as well. And these white ones are quite expensive, but they're cheaper to buy in these kits, and they last a very long time. Well, I found that they've lasted a long time. These are great, especially if you haven't got all the fancy linishing tools and pedestal grinders and stuff. These are a really good way to get around that little problem. I'm going to be doing a lot of grinding in this episode and a lot of talking, it would appear, but this is the hammer that I made recently in a How to Make a Hammer by Hand series, and I haven't done the grinding on this, so I'm going to go over the grinding, the initial grinding before the heat treatment. It doesn't matter how aggressive you are at this point. This doesn't have any sort of heat treatment in it, and also keeping it cool or quenching it off as you go along isn't going to do much, isn't going to disturb it much. I can't remember if I normalised this or not. It's going to go for another normalising cycle anyway, to show a normalising cycle for the heat treatment process. But what I'm going to do before I start doing any normalising processes is I'm going to chop the end of this up. It feels a little bit heavy on one end, and I've got a little bit of a shut at the back here, a little bit fish lip. I'm also going to cut that off. I'm going to cut this off. I'm going to start prepping this hammer to have a look at it, and I'm going to show you how to do that. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over to this vise over here, away from the camera, to try and avoid getting some sparks on it. I'm just going to chop this face off. Okay, so what I've done here is I've flattened this off so it's nice and flat, and I've also flattened this side off so it's nice and flat as well. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the corners. Like if I was making a round piece of bar, I'd take these corners off first and I start bringing this octagon, and I'm also going to put an initial chamfer on here. So I've taken the corners off, and now what I'm going to do, you can do this with a 40 grit, any angle grinder, but I just want to take the sides of these, the cross peens down ever so slightly, and I'm going to do that with the big 9.5 inch with a 40 grit flat disc on there. If you can find them, they're great. If you've got a 9.5 inch grinder, they're great as well. They move a lot of material very quickly. Now I'm just going to use that just to do these sides. It's just going to do a lot quicker job, a lot easier. As you can see, I've just centred that up ever so slightly off centre, hence the 9.5 inch. I've got it nice and square. I've got my little tapers on the end there. Got my tapers on the end there. There you are, you see it there. Doesn't have to be 100% perfect. You just need to be central, and everything needs to be in the right place. And then, like making round bar, I'm going to start taking these corners off now. And then here's our face. And I've just started rounding these edges up like so. Right, I'm going to move on to an 80 grit, and the rule that I like to use is half the grit every time you go through. So I would say you could start 40, 60, 120, but for this I'm going to do 40, 80, 120, and all I'm trying to do is remove as many of the marks that I put in using the large grinding stone and then the 40 grit. So I'm going to move to an 80. 120 grit. This is a partly used 120 grit. It'll slow me down a little bit, and it'll just make everything look a bit tidier in the end, because we won't have it's more like using a slightly higher grit, I feel, but it's not, it's a 120 grit. The other thing I just want to point out is I'm just trapping the eyes just inside the anvil to help, inside the vise, just to help me hold it. This is of course Scotch-Brite that I will be using first. This hasn't been heat treated yet. This is the last grinding stage before heat treatment. So this is the last step I'm going to take on doing this one. So this is our end result, and it's a nicely scuffed up face. I've taken the transitions off ever so slightly, so there's no real sharp corners here. These are nice and smooth, and the same here on this side. I've just got rid of all the scuff, this nice even scuff. Again, nice and smooth, nice and even, everything's nice and tidy. Alright, just like so. And again here. Alright, nice and tidy, nice and flat. You see it's slightly higher in the centre and it drops off. Slight crown. Okay, so this is the one we removed off the hammer handle. Now I could just go through the process of grinding this up, reheat treating it and being done with it, but I don't want to reheat treat it. A lot of you guys at home aren't going to have, or aren't going to want to take these handles off. You're just going to want to leave them on, so there's no need to do that. So if I was doing that with a hammer like this one, which is going to need facing soon, I would place the heads, leave the hammer on the handles and just dip the heads in the bucket of water that I have here available. Now, don't get this wood wet. If it soaks up water, it will expand, then it will contract and your hammer will come loose. Okay, I'm going to take an 80 grit. I think I just said 60. I'm going to take an 80 grit that I've got here, and I'm going to start grinding the faces off with the 80 grit. And then I'm going to move on to the 120, and then I'm going to move on to the slightly coarser Scotch-Brite, then I'm going to move on to the softer Scotch-Brite, and then I'm going to start doing the polishing process. Okay, so I've polished up all the faces now. We got to a reasonable grit there and just softened off all these corners. Those Scotch-Brite pads do a lovely job. They're not very aggressive. I've also taken off all this rust and crud that's built up on there. And I've just been keeping it cool, just dipping it in the water. And then finally the white pad. And for the white, it has a couple of polishing compounds that come with it. A blue and a white polishing compound. I think it's blue first. I'm just going to check. It's white first, white compound first. So basically this stuff is a polishing soap. Come on, come off. Aha, right. Soap to the wheel. And here you have the finished product. Nice and shiny. Doesn't have to be this shiny. And I've done this quite quickly as well. The last thing I'm going to do is, because I pulled these faces up, I'm just going to put a bit of linseed oil on it. Just got a bit of linseed oil on a rag. I'm just going to put a bit of linseed oil on here. Just protect this a bit, stop it from going rusty. Right. Okay, a lot of talking and a lot of grinding, but I think if you have got an angle grinder, you can get really consistent, really good results with a bit of practice and a bit of time. This is still hot actually. This is looking really lovely. The next video that's going to be in this hammer making series is doing the heat treatment and then the final polishing. I'll go over the final polishing a little bit again, and then obviously there's the grinding process for this one, and it's come out really lovely. And as you can see, you can get some really good results with the limited tooling available on the Scotch-Brite pads. And also it gives you, the Scotch-Brite pads give you these really nice soft corners. I'd just like to thank two individuals. First one is Chris Lawrence. Chris Lawrence previously bought a hammer off me and he asked me about redressing his hammers, which is good because he's using them, and hopefully this was helpful, Chris. You don't have to take the handles off, but you do have to keep them cool, so definitely keep dipping them in water whilst you're doing the grinding, and like I said, try not to get the handles wet. And the other person I'd like you to check out if you get the chance is Ferris Forge. I'm pretty sure that some of you guys already watch his channel. He has got a video on doing this by hand. He did one face of a hammer he bought, which managed to dent his anvil and also put some pretty nasty galls and stuff in some of his work. He wasn't happy with it, but he did do one side with a file and some sandpaper, and he got some really good results. Did in the end start using some of the tooling to do the polishing, but polishing takes a long time, and if you want to get it right, you've got to do it right, I guess. So thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, remember to leave a like and subscribe. And if you are already a subscriber, make sure you ring that bell for notification. Leave your comments down below. Let me know if you enjoyed this video. Let me know if this was helpful. Hopefully it was. Then that is everything. So thank you for joining me. I will leave a link up here to part 1, which was the actually forging the hammer and talking about hammer eyes. And then this would be a random video. This here is my Patreon, great way to support the channel, and go check that out. And this here is a subscribe button. Thank you for joining me, guys. See you later. Goodbye.